welcome back to Tony's workshop, where I'm still trying to build this tank. So since I last spoke to you, I've now painted, cleaned, primed, painted, rubbed down the whole shebang, the entire lower section of the tank. Really pleased with the results. I was very lucky. I had a couple of good days where I was able to take it outside and very little wind, perfect drying conditions, and managed to get all the paint on. So it basically meant I gave it 2 base primer coats, rubbed down in between with wet and dry sandpaper. Then I did a final primer coat, and then we basically waited overnight, came back the next day, one more final wet and dry working on it, and then started applying the top coats. It's had 3 top coats, each coat having a session of rubbing down with wet and dry paper in between, just to make sure I get a really smooth finish, and I'm really pleased with the coverage on it. It's worked out extremely well. So what I'll do in a moment, I'll take you for a tour around the tank and some of the little details I've started doing myself within my capabilities. So here we have it. The tank is now fully painted on the base. As you can see, I went ahead, put a bit of a wash coat on the track tow cable, and that's now installed. I'm very happy with the finish on this. I've painted all underneath here as well, underneath these fenders. Coming around to the back of the tank, what I've done is I've given it a little bit of aging on the exhaust system, and looking at replicating what looks like a little bit of rust coming through. I may do a bit more work on this, but that's just really sort of the starter. I mean, even a brand new tank coming out of the factory would probably do that after a couple of weeks. Only one other little enhancement I've made to this is the introduction of this little reflector here, and that was, I basically core drilled an old reflector badge, solid plastic, and then used my Dremel to size it down and position it where it is now. I've also colour washed the tow hook and colour washed the jack. So really pleased. It's come out very well. It may need another coat of paint. That's why I've just left all the plastic and the masking on for the time being. So what I'm going to do now is going to go on and start the process of the top part of the tank. Just thought I'd talk you through that. And we'll start building that slowly together. But I have already sort of gone ahead of myself a little bit, which I'll explain to you in a moment. But I'll be right back. So as you can see, I've started assembling the rear portion of the top deck of the tank. This has all been put together. I'm very pleased how this has all gone together. Again, I know I keep saying it, but make sure you just fish out all your fittings and fixtures you need prior to starting. The only tip I'd say on this is make sure that this plate is the right way round. This hatch hook here is only on that side. I didn't do it, thank God, but I just thought when I was putting it together, it'd be very simple, because from one very quick glance, this plate looks exactly the same from one side to the other when you flip it over. Again, beautifully engineered by Armortek. This plate comes up, and that's the catch that holds it in position. So I'm guessing this is what gives me access, and in real terms this will be access to the engine bay and fans and the lot, but I guess this will give me access to some of the electronics of the tank later on. So just release that clamp and then relieve that. So again, this is very simple. One little tip that I have is these square headed fixings here. When I've put these in, I wanted to dress them so they're all facing the same way. I'm fortunate that I've got an old clock winder, and I found it was number 4 size was perfect. Fits perfectly in the hole and around the socket. So I'm not sure there's a better tool than that actually on the market to do this, and that's something they don't tell you on the Armortek website. But anyway, and so with this, really, they tell you to super glue just 2 fixings, which is this one and that one, and that's because these need to be cut off because they'll clash with the clamps on the sort of the deck mounts, if you like. So that's just been super glued, but all the others have got fixings on the back. Now, if I turn this over, you'll see that these 2 fixings here and here are the super glued fixings. All the others have been thread locked and secured with nuts. Now what I'm going to do is, I've started doing it anyway with my Dremel. I'm just going to take off all this excess thread. I don't think that's needed. I think it just interferes, and I'll also cut that off. And then these two here, from what I understand and what I've worked out, are, you don't put these fixings in just yet, because this is where you fix through to secure this section to the top of the tank. So what I thought I'd do is I'll just carry on using my Dremel to remove these heads, and then I'll go and select all the components for my next step, which is the other side of this, and then we'll go through the very next stage. So we'll wear safety goggles for this, because these are big pieces of metal, and with my trusted battery operated Dremel, fantastic tool for all sorts of jobs, but for this particular job it's amazing. It's going to get a bit noisy now, so forgive me. Simple as that. Now the cutting disc that I've got on here basically takes this off with no sharp edges. There's one there that just needs to be taken down a bit more. And that is it. So that's that done. Pick up the shrapnel and all the little shards and bin those. I mean, in the instructions they tell you to screw this down, but I'm leaving that for now. I'll leave that until I decide why. But they also show you to glue, I'll bring this into the camera, to glue a screw for some reason into this. Again, I'm not going to do that yet. I'll only do that before priming and painting. So everything else was reasonably straightforward, nothing really to, I mean, I know there's all sorts of upgrades you can put on this, and I've seen it, but you know, I think it's perfectly fine as it is. There's enough to worry about building a tank like this without, I mean, that's a very, very experienced builder. But the things, again, just to go over, I'm put these in, they're all dressed in the same direction. I'm guessing that's the way to do it. And using the right tool. Now, again, I don't know if that's the right tool or not, but it's a clock winder. If you don't have one of these, they're actually very easy to get hold of. Very cheap, simple tool, very inexpensive, a few pounds on most of the websites available on the old internet. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start building up these pieces here. But obviously I've got to go now and spend the next 4 or 5 hours of my life trying to find all the fixings and get ready to do that. But in fact, as I said in the earlier video, it's actually getting a little bit easier to sort of narrow them down, because as all the fixings thin out, it's a lot easier to find. So really looking forward to doing this bit. As I said on my previous video, it's like starting a new chapter and learning all about this part of the tank. I got so used to building the base of it, and very comfortable with that, and I'm reasonably comfortable with this, and I'm looking forward to cracking on. Right, so everything's all ready to go. So I've pulled out all the elements that I need, all the parts I'm going to need, all the fixings, the sort of plugs, a ton of these square-headed section screws, corresponding M3 nuts, these beautifully made, and they are beautifully made, brass wing nuts for the deck clamps, and the various different pins. So I'm good to go. So again, I mean, actually that didn't take too long at all. It took about 20 minutes just to, it's more about getting the right fixings and make sure that, I mean, I've got on my cutting mat, I've got a scale. So if I'm not sure, most of the time generally I can do it by eye, but if not sure, you can use that to sort of make sure it's the right size pin against what they suggest. So now we're going to go off and start building this. So what I do before I start building, I go through all the components and just make sure there's no issues with them. I don't think there is much with this, apart from I think it's this piece here, which has clearly had a bit of a manufacturing faux pas, and they've tried to resin fill that, and I can see that it's actually damaged the internal screw part. I don't know if you can see that. Let me see. There you go. So I'm going to have to see how I can get around that. But again, you know, on the whole, Most of these components are fine. There's no issues with them. Generally speaking, they're pretty good. But you know, I mean, even that, it's a cast aluminium piece, so it's never going to be absolutely perfect. So a little bit of cleaning up and a little bit of work is required. But you know, I'm happy to do that. And as long as you can, just be patient. And if you've got the right sort of tools, and if you're embarking on a build like this, I should imagine you've got most of the tools you're going to need, apart from potentially, I don't know, like a Dremel or something like that. But they're, again, fantastic tool, relatively easy to get hold of, and reasonably priced. Moderation when you think about the wide variance of uses they have. I've had this particular model for about 2 years, and it's got it's pretty much done everything from cutting, grinding, smoothing, sanding, drilling, you name it. Anyway, so we're going to get on and we're going to start building the rest of this, and I'll probably film this in real time and then speed it up. So I've started with the first of the deck clamps, which are these really lovely, well-made little clamps with the little brass wing nuts. And I just thought I'd show you how to do that, or how I'm doing it. A couple of things just to be mindful of. They come packed in the same bag, so they're packed in the same bag, and there's 4 of each. If you're not careful, you could end up putting the longer of the two. As you can see, there's a difference between the two. The longer of the two are not for this. We're going to put that away. We're just going to use the 2 of the smaller ones, and I'm just going to show you how I've been doing this. Now, what I've found is that again, just in the sort of manufacturing process, I feel that these need to be just reamed out just a little bit, so that the pin fits in there. I don't want to force it in. I mean, I'll still tap it in with my little mallet, but I don't want to have to put too much force behind it. But I've found that if I just gently use the little modelling file that I've got just to open that up, not open it up, but just clean that hole up, it just allows the pin to go through a little bit easier. So I think that's going to be fine. And these are a M2.5 8mm pin. If you can see that, and that goes through here. So try and get that to the camera, in that hole here, and then through into the actual other part of the deck clamp. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to position this. Just take the camera so you can see that. So I've got this positioned like so. Make sure you don't position them in the far too too open, because you'll be finding it difficult to close that up. So roughly this sort of this distance or this angle will be about right. Then I'll just position the pin in there, and it's using my mallet. And as typically, as soon as I put the camera on, everything just becomes a little bit more awkward. So I just need to realign that. So that's in the first side. Just keep making sure that is and that's sent home beautifully. So as you can see, the hinge is working as it should. And then the next thing that you should do is take the little M2.5 12mm countersunk fixing. Position that. Now I would super glue that in, because the only function this has really is to be able to thread the little brass wing nut onto, and then that positions itself roughly 45-degree angle onto the deck. Like so. And then the M3 countersunk 16mm fixing then screws that into the top of the deck. Now these screws, for whatever reason, are longer than they need to be, but I'm using the right fixings. So just before I tighten that up, I'm just going to position that as it shows in the it's at 45, looks like 45 degrees to me. There's no mention of it in the instructions. Just hold on to that while I just tighten that up. That's now going to be fine. What I will do is I'll just pop that on like so, and then so I don't lose the fixing, just thread on the little brass. Now if you don't, what I think is if you don't super glue this 12mm M2.5 countersunk fixing to the underside of that, when you start turning the brass wing nut, it will just spin. You don't want that. So that's fine, and I'm going to let that set, and I'll carry on. I'll do the next one. Can't remember if I think I have, but yes, I have. These are some of the more fiddly bits, but even so, it's still enjoyable. Just as you start seeing the thing come together. It's popped out. I would suggest make sure these are in together, so that if you have to tap them in like I'm doing, I wouldn't drill them out too much, because you don't want them to be loose. You want them to be a fairly nice snug fit so that they don't fall out, because you can't thread lock these. There we go. You can hear the sound and the pitch change as it goes through to this part. Just make sure that's aligned. And that's in there beautifully. So that's the next deck hinge. And that's it in its closed position. So again, don't do thread lock on these. Keep these loose and keep them fairly tight, but you don't want them too tight. So obviously they do need to move. And as before, a little bit of super glue just on the back of that. Pop your 12mm screw in, position that where you want it on the deck, and then get your 16mm M3 fixing. Classic. I'll try and do this before the glue goes off, because I want to try and position the threaded part that the brass wing nut goes onto before it goes off completely. So I'll just lift that up and hold that. And then just give that a final turn, I think. Give it a rough indication of whether or not they're both more or less the same. Just needs to come around a little bit more, I think. And that's that. Hold on to that and give it a final tighten. Pop that into position and take the final little brass wing nut. And that's that piece done. So they're both done now. But prior to that, I did clean up just by using my cleaning cloths, the thread of both the male and female of this. And I'm not thread locking these. I'm not sure even what, at this stage again, I've never having built one of these before. I'm not even sure if they've got any real function other than just the detailing side. So I'm going to leave them as they are. The next part for me is to assemble the next. I'll sort of take this and zoom out. So is this sort of assembling this side, which is made up of this piece, the larger of the two vents and the smaller, and then the various hinge bolts. Now it seems to go together quite nicely. A ton of fixings through here, which I will use my clock winder like I did before to secure these down. And then there is an option that comes with this kit, which is the brass, sort of in the brass cuttings or etchings, a grate that goes over this. And I think that would really finish it off. I quite like the roughness of this, although when you first look at it you think they should have cleaned it up, but I think it actually adds to the character of it. So it is cast aluminium, so I'd expect to see that. And I think when this is all painted and sprayed up, I just, it's looking, I'm really so pleased of how this is all going. So I'm going to carry on doing this and the other side, and I'll catch up with you soon. So I've got these roughly positioned where they need to be. I've put the deck hinge hook in place. Had to machine this down a little bit with my Dremel just to get it to fit in there. I don't want it to be a tight fit. I want it to be nice and loose because it needs to do its job, and by doing that it's simply just, it's very clever, very smart. Really like that. Now the only thing is, you've got 44mm long M4 pins which are supposed to go in here and then the other side, and when I say supposed, they do go there and they go in, lovely, and they do their job, fantastic. But there's no mention of it in the instructions, but as soon as you do this they fall out. So obviously we don't want that, because so what I'm thinking is, right or wrongly, I'm thinking what I'll do is I'll put that in there, and then just before I send that home I'll put some thread locker. I don't want to use super glue. I can definitely not glue this end because I want this to be flexible, but I'm going to use, I'm just debating whether I use thread locker or super glue on this bit. I think I'm more inclined to use thread locker. I've got the extreme one, which should do the job. But what I'll do is, I don't want any of it getting into this bit. So what I'll do is, I'm thinking I'm going to position it about here, then thread lock it, turn it, thread lock it, make sure there's a generous coating of thread lock, and then just send that by hand into that. And that should keep the thread locker just in this section here and keep that free, so that this has got free movement and this is fixed. So that's what I'm going to do. Now you may live, or I may live to regret that, and you may see or witness me regretting that, but that's the only way I can think of doing it. And again, I've gone through this and there's no mention of it. So here we go. Commit and be damned, as they say. So I'm going to just give that a generous coating of thread locker, and there, and then just gently send that home. Wipe off the excess onto my beloved bench. Turn that around and do exactly the same thing on this side, making sure that pin is clean, about there. The reason I think I'm using thread locker, I know that in the past, if I've ever had to remove a fixing with thread locker on, not necessarily sometimes my fault, sometimes just I'm trying to repair something, using just a hot air gun heats it up and allows you to manipulate the fixing without damaging the fixing and get the fixing out. So at least this, with its super glue, is slightly different. Also, I find super glue with cast aluminium, unless you can get in and clean the hole, it doesn't give you that good a fixing. So that's that. I'm going to leave that to one side. Come and do the other one. But this time, just again, just a note. So looking in this orientation, this particular piece here has got an additional hole here. Haven't quite worked that out yet. It's further down into the deck accessories. So make sure that this particular one with the hole here is on this side of the tank. And then with this, again, I'm just going to put the little deck hinge on it. Same kind of deal as the last one, which is this deck hook, I should say, or the little hook. Now that sits, as you can see, I don't know if you can see, but it doesn't quite fit. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my Dremel to clean the end up, both sides, so that it goes in there nice and not too, I don't want to be tight at all. So with my cutting disc, armed with my cutting, and again, I'm very used to doing this. I've got my goggles on, and I'm just going to turn it around. Now obviously it will get hot, so don't labour on it. It just needs a little bit more work. Let that cool down a bit. So it will get hot. I could put it in my bench vise, but for the time it takes me to do that, it's quite easy. So I'm going to clean this up, get this in here, and do exactly the same thing with the pins, and then we'll move on to actually fixing these main grills in. So that's the pieces filed down, fitting perfectly. We're going to go on now and use the square-headed nuts, M3 nuts and square-headed bolts, and using the clock winder to do that. And I will dress them again, all in the same kind of orientation is these. I'll use Loctite thread locker on all of these fixings. I've just dry fixed these, just positioned them with the lined up with the hole, just to make sure that there's no clashes with this hatch when this is open. That works too well, really. And so I'm going to carry on fixing these now, and then once we've done that, we'll be moving on to the other part of the top deck. So that's this part of the deck completed. Everything's working as it should. Really pleased how that's gone. Relatively straightforward. The only bit of work I had to do was to, as you saw, file these down so they fit in there sort of snug but not loose. And then I just wanted to make sure that these sections were aligned in a way that I thought was appropriate. So I haven't got them tight up against this, nice and flush on the end here. And I just used a clamp to clamp this in position while I put the fixings in. So that was that. Probably one of the easiest parts of the build so far. And I'm now going to just spin this over. And as you can see, there is a multitude of bolts here, which I just think they need to be taken off. I'm not, it doesn't ask you to do that, but to me it feels right to take them off, because you know there's going to be a lot of electronics and everything underneath this, so you know, who's to say that it doesn't get snagged on one of these. So I'm going to get my trusty little Dremel and start taking these bolts off. I really hope I'm not making a mistake, but I can't see any reason why not to. So that's that all trimmed. That back upside down. Pop that over there. Now. And get rid of all this little offcuts and swarf. That one's a bit hot. I'm not wearing gloves on this because I do use I use the Dremel quite a lot. I've got barrier cream that I use, which is this stuff here. Fantastic. I would always recommend, because literally at the end of the day you can simply wipe your hands clean and they come up like as if you've not been doing anything like this at all day. I think gloves just get in the way. So that's that. Got a little bit of weight to that now, but that sits nice and flat. So I think I'm happy with that. Pretty sure we've done the right thing, and as I said, I'm pleased. I would recommend doing this. Obviously, bearing in mind I have thread locked all of these, so there's a high probability they will not come undone. So I'm quite comfortable to remove the extended threads. I just think it's going to be a better job. So the next step is building up the next section of this deck, which we'll start, well, right away.